Cash Patel sat in that Senate chamber thinking he was untouchable. He'd rehearsed his answers, prepared his defenses, built his walls of carefully chosen words. But what he didn't count on was Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a man who doesn't ask questions unless he already knows the answers. And what Whitehouse exposed in those few hours wasn't just a lie. It was two lies, both under oath, both calculated, both designed to hide something much bigger than anyone realized. Because when the person running America's most powerful law enforcement agency can't tell the truth about the simplest questions, you have to ask yourself what else is being hidden behind that carefully constructed facade.
Can you explain that?
Again, that is an entirely inaccurate presupposition. I do not have an enemies list. You can continue to characterize it as you wish. The only actions we take, generally speaking, for personnel at the FBI are ones based on merit and qualification and your ability to uphold your constitutional duty. You fall short, you don't work there anymore.
Well, there was a list. You don't like it to be called an enemies list, and it had about 60 names, and about 20 have had an adverse action. So those are, I think, pretty clear facts. Let me move on to your grand jury testimony, which we also talked about when you were here. I think you indicated that you understood that a witness in the grand jury is free to discuss afterwards whatever they told the grand jury. And you then went on to suggest, saying, I can't go into court orders granted by the DC District Chief Judge, and you want me to violate a court order. In those remarks, you fairly plainly suggested that there was a court order of some kind that somehow restricted or limited your ability to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury. Since then, that chief judge that you mentioned, Judge Boasberg, has written, and I'm quoting him here, Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E allows witnesses like Patel to divulge the contents of their testimony, meaning that nothing was preventing him from doing so before the committee. Can we confirm here today that there is no court order of any kind that limits your ability as a witness before the grand jury to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury?
We can confirm that pursuant to my action, that grand jury testimony has been released, the transcript.
Let's, in what forum was it released, may I ask?
Publicly.
Okay, we'll check on that. The FBI does background investigations. In the case of a U.S. attorney, Janine Pirro, it has come to light that in a civil proceeding, that Fox News executives, prior to her confirmation, called her, I'm quoting here, a reckless maniac who makes, quote, insane comments, and said, I don't trust her to be responsible, and noted her penchant for what they called random conspiracy theories on weird internet sites. My question to you is, did that turn up in her background investigation?
For any background investigation, Senator, we do not discuss those publicly. And for every background investigation, when there's an adjudication, it is not made by me. It is made by the career professionals who run the inspection division and background check system.
Do you know if that information was found? You see, we're an oversight body here, and there are really three possibilities here. One is that the FBI background investigation didn't find that stuff. That's worth noting because these investigations, full field background investigations, are supposed to find that stuff. That's possibility one. Possibility two is that the FBI did in fact find that information and then did not report it to the administration or to the committee. And the third is that you found it, you reported it to the administration, and they went ahead with her nomination, knowing that she had been described as a reckless maniac who made insane comments, who wasn't trusted by colleagues to be responsible, and who had a penchant for random conspiracy theories on weird internet sites. Are you saying that this committee does not have any authority or reason to look into which of those things is true?
This committee can look into anything it wishes. I'm telling you that the background investigations that are done by the HRD division are done by career individuals. They do not report the details of those to me. They adjudicate those independently and individually. That's how it's always been done.
What happened during the pause of FBI background investigations that was alleged in the complaint against you and the FBI by the FBI agents who were terminated? On February 12th, Emil Bovee directed the FBI, quote, to pause any FBI background investigations of Trump nominees until Patel was confirmed, which happened on February 20th, is the general description of what they alleged. Why, do you know, were background investigations paused? Was it so material like this could be scrubbed out of them? And have they been resumed without that pause fully and normally after your arrival on February 20th?
I can speak to the time period since I got there. Background investigations have been ongoing across the board at the FBI.
Why was the pause, do you know?
I was not there.
It wasn't explained to you when you got there? Oh, by the way, boss, they've had an 8-day pause on background investigations. You think that would be something that would be explained to you at some point?
Again, I leave it to the men and women at the HRD division to run background investigations. I do not interfere with them.
I get that. But what I don't get is whether you were told about that pause, and why would you not be told about that pause?
I don't recall that, sir.
All right. The allegation also relates that part of the employee review of senior staff was whether or not they voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. Since when is who you voted for a proper question for agents to be asked?
I don't know what allegation you're referring to, Senator. If it's from an ongoing matter in litigation.
The hearing started like most do. Routine questions, predictable deflections, the usual political theater that Washington puts on for the cameras. But then Whitehouse leaned forward and the temperature in the room changed. He wasn't there to make speeches or score political points. He was there to build a case, brick by methodical brick, using Patel's own words as the foundation. And at the center of everything was one specific claim that Patel had made months earlier. A claim so carefully worded it almost sounded legitimate. He'd told Congress he couldn't discuss his grand jury testimony because of a court order. Not just any court order, but one issued by the chief judge of the D.C. District Court. It sounded official, legal, ironclad, the kind of thing that makes senators nod and move on to the next question. Except Whitehouse didn't move on. He did something most senators don't bother doing anymore. He checked. He went to the actual judge Patel had cited, Judge Beryl Howell, and asked a simple question. Does this court order exist? And the answer came back clear as daylight. No, there was no court order. There had never been a court order. Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure, 6E, explicitly allows witnesses to discuss their own grand jury testimony whenever they want. It's right there in black and white, established law, no ambiguity whatsoever, which meant Patel hadn't just misunderstood some legal technicality. He'd fabricated the entire thing, invoking the authority of a federal judge to create a legal barrier that didn't exist. Think about what that means for a second. The man leading the FBI, an agency built entirely on evidence and truth, stood before Congress and invented a court order to avoid answering questions. This wasn't a memory lapse or a confused interpretation of complex law. This was strategic deception, using legal-sounding language to manipulate the process. He bet that nobody would fact-check him, that the illusion of judicial authority would be enough to shut down the inquiry. And for a while it worked. Senators moved on, the hearing continued, and Patel walked away thinking he'd successfully dodged accountability. But Whitehouse remembered. He always remembers. Months passed, and Patel found himself back in front of the committee. This time, Whitehouse came prepared with the judge's statement in hand. He He asked Patel directly, calmly, with that measured tone that makes every word land like a gavel. Can we confirm there's no court order limiting your ability to discuss your grand jury testimony? And this is where it gets interesting, because Patel could have admitted the truth right there. He could have said he'd been mistaken, apologized, moved forward. Instead, he doubled down with a completely different lie. He claimed the grand jury testimony had already been released publicly. Problem solved, right? Except once again, it was completely false. No transcript had been released. Nothing was public. It was another fabrication, piled on top of the first one. Whitehouse pressed him. Where was it released? What forum? And Patel's answer was vague, evasive, the kind of response someone gives when they're buying time to think of the next deflection. He said it had been released publicly, but couldn't provide specifics, because there were no specifics. There was no release. It was another calculated lie designed to make the problem disappear. Two separate falsehoods, both under oath, both about the same topic, both told to Congress. This wasn't confusion or poor memory. This was a pattern, a deliberate strategy of deception, from someone who'd built his entire career on knowing exactly how to bend the truth without technically breaking it. But the lies about grand jury testimony were just the beginning. Because Whitehouse wasn't finished digging, he shifted to something else that had been bothering him, something that multiple sources had whispered about, but nobody had confronted directly. The list. Everyone called it the enemies list, though Patel hated that phrase. According to testimony and internal documents, there were about 60 names on this list. 20 of those people had already faced what the FBI called adverse actions, terminations, reassignments, demotions. When Whitehouse brought it up, Patel got defensive immediately. He insisted it wasn't an enemies list, that every personnel decision was based purely on merit and qualification and constitutional duty, except the numbers told a different story. 60 people identified, 20 already gone, and the common thread wasn't performance reviews or misconduct violations. It was loyalty. Whether you'd supported the right people, said the right things, stayed quiet when you were supposed to stay quiet. The FBI had always prided itself on being apolitical, on following evidence wherever it led, regardless of who it implicated. But under Patel's leadership, that foundation was cracking. People were being evaluated not on their work, but on their allegiance. And anyone who'd been involved in investigations that certain political figures didn't like suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a career-ending decision. Whitehouse laid out the facts methodically. This many names, this many terminations, this pattern of targeting. And Patel's only defense was semantics. Don't call it an enemies list. Call it accountability. Call it maintaining standards. But when you fire 20 people from a list of 60 and all of them happen to share one thing in common, it stops being about standards and starts being about punishment. That's when the hearing shifted from uncomfortable to dangerous, because everyone in that room understood what it meant. The FBI wasn't supposed to serve one person or one administration. It was supposed to serve the law. And the moment you start purging people based on loyalty instead of competence, you're not running a law enforcement agency anymore. You're running something much darker. Then Whitehouse dropped another bomb, this one about background investigations. The FBI vets everyone who gets appointed to sensitive government positions. It's one of their core functions, making sure people with access to classified information don't have disqualifying secrets or conflicts. But something strange had happened during the transition. Whitehouse had evidence that background investigations for Trump nominees had been paused for 8 days, specifically from February 12th until February 20th, which just happened to be the day Patel was confirmed as FBI director. The pause came from acting Deputy Director Paul Abate, who allegedly told agents to hold off on vetting Trump's picks until Patel was officially in charge. Why would you pause background checks? What possible legitimate reason could there be for stopping the vetting process right when it mattered most? Whitehouse asked Patel directly if he knew about the pause, if anyone had explained it to him when he took over, and Patel's answer was telling. He claimed he didn't recall, that he left background investigations to the professionals in the Human Resources Division, that he didn't interfere with their work. But think about what he was saying. An 8-day pause in background investigations during a presidential transition, and the new FBI director supposedly never heard about it? Never asked why? Never wondered if something unusual had happened right before he arrived? The implications were staggering because one of those background investigations involved a woman named Jeanine Pirro, nominated to be a U.S. attorney. And according to documents that surfaced in a civil case, Fox News executives had some pretty strong opinions about her. They'd called her a reckless maniac in internal communications. They'd said she made insane comments. They'd explicitly stated they didn't trust her to be responsible, and they'd noted her habit of promoting random conspiracy theories from weird internet sites. This wasn't partisan opposition or political mudslinging. These were her own colleagues at a friendly network raising red flags about her judgment and stability. So Whitehouse asked the obvious question, did that information turn up in her background investigation? Because if it didn't, that means the FBI's vetting process is broken, that they're not finding basic public information that anyone with internet access could discover. If If it did turn up and wasn't reported to the administration or Congress, that means someone actively suppressed it, hiding disqualifying information to protect a preferred nominee. And if it was reported and the administration went ahead anyway, that means they knew exactly who they were appointing and didn't care. All three possibilities were bad, but Patel wouldn't answer. He hid behind procedure, claiming he didn't get involved in the details of individual background checks, that career professionals handled everything independently, except that explanation didn't hold up because the pause happened. Someone made the decision to stop background investigations right when they were most critical. Someone decided that Trump's nominees shouldn't be fully vetted until Patel was in charge. And now that he was in charge, he was claiming ignorance about the whole thing. Whitehouse wasn't buying it, and neither was anyone paying attention, because the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Lies about grand jury testimony, purges based on loyalty, paused background investigations, suppressed vetting information. Each piece by itself might look like bureaucratic confusion or honest mistakes, but when you line them all up, they form a picture of something much more deliberate. This is where the story gets even darker, because Whitehouse started pulling on another thread that nobody had examined closely enough. Kash Patel's history, his track record, the people who'd actually worked with him before he got this job, and what he found was a chorus of warnings from people who should have known better, people who'd served in the same administration that was now elevating him to one of the most powerful positions in government. John Bolton, who'd been Trump's national security advisor, called Patel absolutely unqualified for any senior position. Not just wrong for the job or lacking experience, absolutely unqualified. Those were his exact words. Charles Kupperman, who'd been Bolton's deputy, said Patel's ideas about intelligence and national security were ludicrous. William Barr, Trump's own attorney general, stated publicly that Patel had virtually no experience that would qualify him to run the FBI. And then there was Gina Haspel, the CIA director, who'd reportedly threatened to resign rather than have Patel serve as her deputy. Think about that. The head of the CIA, someone who'd spent decades in intelligence work, someone who understood threats and assessed risks for a living, looked at Kash Patel and said she'd rather quit than work with him. These weren't Democratic opponents or political enemies. These were Republicans, Trump appointees, people who'd served loyally in the same administration, and every single one of them was waving red flags, but nobody listened. Or more accurately, the people with power to stop his appointment chose not to listen because Patel had something more valuable than experience or competence. He had loyalty. He'd proven over and over that he would defend the right people, attack the right targets, shape narratives in ways that served political interests rather than truth. He'd been one of the key figures behind the memo that tried to discredit the FBI's investigation into Russian interference. He'd gone on television shows to mock intelligence professionals and push conspiracy theories. He'd built his entire reputation not on building cases or conducting investigations, but on being willing to say whatever needed to be said to protect powerful allies. And that's exactly why he got the job. Because in the calculation of the people who appointed him, loyalty mattered more than capability. Someone who would follow orders without question was worth more than someone who might ask uncomfortable questions or follow evidence in unwanted directions. The warnings from Bolton and Barr and Haspel weren't ignored because they were wrong. They were ignored because they were right. Patel was exactly what they said he was, and that was precisely what made him valuable to the people who needed someone running the FBI who wouldn't let truth get in the way of loyalty. Whitehouse kept digging, and what he found next added another layer to the whole mess. Financial disclosures showed that Patel held investments in companies with ties to China, structured through entities in the Cayman Islands. Now, offshore investments aren't automatically disqualifying, but context matters. This is the director of the FBI, the agency responsible for investigating Chinese espionage, Chinese cyber attacks, Chinese efforts to steal American technology and infiltrate American institutions. And he's personally profiting from investments connected to Chinese companies. The conflict of interest was so obvious it didn't need explaining. How can you credibly investigate threats from a country when you're financially entangled with companies operating there? But again, nobody demanded transparency. No statement explaining the investments. No divestment to avoid conflicts. No acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the person running counterintelligence operations against China shouldn't be making money from Chinese-linked entities. The silence was deafening, and that silence said more than any explanation could have, because it revealed the calculation at work. Conflicts of interest only matter if someone cares about integrity. And the people protecting Patel had already decided that integrity was negotiable, which brings us to what Whitehouse called the most dangerous part of Patel's agenda, the dismantling of the FBI's counterintelligence division. Patel had stated publicly, not secretly but openly, that he wanted to shut down the D.C. Counterintelligence Office. He wanted to scatter agents into field offices across the country, breaking up the centralized unit that tracked foreign interference and espionage. On the surface, he framed it as efficiency, as getting agents out of Washington and into communities. But anyone who understood how counterintelligence works knew what it really meant. It meant destroying the institutional knowledge and coordination that made the division effective. The DC Counterintelligence Office wasn't just another FBI department. It was the nerve center for tracking Russian intelligence operations, Chinese espionage networks, and other foreign threats to American security. It was the unit that had uncovered previous attempts to manipulate elections, infiltrate government systems, and compromise officials. Breaking it apart wasn't reform, it was sabotage. And when you connected that move to everything else happening across the administration, a pattern emerged that Whitehouse described as Trump Russia 2.0. Not a repeat of old scandals, but a new version, a dismantling of defenses from the inside, because Patel wasn't operating in isolation. Attorney General Pam Bondi had shut down the Justice Department's Kleptocracy Task Force, the unit that went after corrupt foreign oligarchs and seized their illegally obtained assets. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard had been praised repeatedly by Russian state media as friendly to Moscow's interests. Piece by piece, the mechanisms designed to protect American democracy from foreign manipulation were being quietly dismantled or placed under leadership that seemed more interested in avoiding investigations than conducting them. None of it proved coordination or conspiracy, but all of it pointed in the same direction. Away from accountability, toward a system where certain questions wouldn't be asked and certain threats wouldn't be investigated. Whitehouse's voice got quieter as he laid all of this out, not louder. He didn't rant or yell or try to manufacture outrage. He just presented the facts, one after another, building a record that couldn't be ignored even if it could be dismissed. And at the end, he said something that stuck with everyone in that room. Mark my words, this Patel guy will come back to haunt you. It wasn't a political attack. It was a warning. Because Whitehouse had seen this movie before. He'd watched dark money corrupt the courts, corporate influence hollow out regulations, and truth become optional in institutions that were supposed to be built on it. And he'd learned that the time to sound the alarm isn't after the damage is done. It's when the warning might still matter. What makes this entire story so deeply troubling isn't just that Patel lied. Politicians and officials lie all the time, and most of them face consequences eventually. What makes this different is that he lied twice, under oath, about the same topic, and walked away without repercussions. He invoked a fake court order to silence himself, got caught, then invented a fake public release to cover the first lie. And nothing happened. No perjury charges. No accountability. No consequences. Which means every other official watching learned a valuable lesson. Lying works. As long as you're protected by the right people, truth is optional. It's the real crisis here. Not one man's dishonesty, but the system's acceptance of it. When the director of the FBI can fabricate legal authority to avoid questions and face no punishment, what message does that send to every agent working under him? What does it tell prosecutors deciding whether to bring cases? What does it communicate to the public about whether the law applies equally to everyone? The answer is obvious and terrifying. It doesn't. Power protects power, and truth only matters when it's convenient. The FBI was founded on the principle that the law stands above politics, that evidence matters more than loyalty, that no one is beyond accountability. But that foundation only holds if people believe it's true. Once officials learn they can lie without consequence, once loyalty becomes more valuable than integrity, once truth becomes negotiable, the whole structure starts to crack. Not all at once, not with dramatic collapses, but slowly, quietly, one compromised principle at a time. Until one day you wake up and realize the institution you thought was protecting you has become something else entirely. Whitehouse understands this better than most, because he's spent years documenting these small betrayals, building records that others dismiss as procedural nitpicking. But procedure isn't nitpicking. Procedure is what prevents power from becoming absolute. It's what forces officials to answer questions and provide evidence and justify their actions. And when procedure breaks down, when hearings become theater and oversight becomes performance, that's when democracy starts its long slide towards something darker. The hearing ended without resolution. Patel kept his job. The lies remained on the record but triggered no investigation. Senators gave speeches, cameras captured sound bites, and Washington moved on to the next crisis. But the damage was done, not to Patel, but to the institution itself. Because now everyone knows. The FBI director can lie to Congress twice and walk away untouched. The person responsible for enforcing the law isn't bound by it. And that precedent, that acceptance of dishonesty at the highest levels, will ripple outward in ways we won't fully understand until it's too late to reverse. This is how institutions die. Not with revolutions or coups, but with quiet surrenders. With officials who test the boundaries of truth and find them flexible. With senators who know better, but lack the power or will to enforce consequences. With a public that's seen so many scandals they've become numb to new ones. The crisis isn't that one man lied. The crisis is that lying has become normal, expected, just another tool in the political playbook. And that's why Whitehouse's warning matters. Not because he's trying to score points or win headlines, but because he's trying to preserve something that's slipping away. The idea that truth should matter, that officials should be honest, that power should face accountability. Simple concepts that used to be foundational and are now treated as quaint relics of a more naive time. But they're not relics. They're the load-bearing walls of democratic governance. And when you remove them, everything collapses eventually. So when you watch that hearing footage, when you see Whitehouse methodically laying out the lies and Patel deflecting and dodging, understand what you're really watching. You're watching the slow-motion failure of accountability, the normalization of dishonesty, the acceptance of corruption as just how things work now. And if that doesn't bother you, if that doesn't make you angry or concerned or motivated to demand better, then the people who benefit from that corruption have already won. Because the line between a functioning democracy and a failing one isn't violence or dramatic upheaval. It's honesty. It's whether the people in power still fear consequences for lying. And right now, in this moment, with this FBI director and this Congress and this precedent, that fear is disappearing. Which means we're crossing a line that will be very hard to cross back over. Not because the damage is irreversible, but because once people get used to living without truth, they forget why it mattered in the first place. That's the real story here. Not about one hearing or one lie or even one corrupt official. It's about what happens when a society decides that truth is too expensive, accountability is too difficult, and integrity is too old-fashioned to maintain. It's about the moment when we collectively shrug and accept that this is just how things are now. And that moment, that surrender, is exactly what people like Whitehouse are trying to prevent. Not because they're naive enough to think they can stop it entirely, but because they're determined enough to make sure history can't claim we didn't know, that someone warned us, that the evidence was presented, that we had a choice. And now the question is what we do with that choice, whether we demand better or accept what we're given, whether we hold officials accountable or let them define their own rules, whether we fight for truth or surrender to convenience, because this story isn't over, it's just beginning. And how it ends depends entirely on whether enough people still care about the difference between what's said and what's true. That's the test. That's always been the test. And right now, we're failing it.